get started here. I know we have some other people probably wandering in, but it doesn't matter if they don't hear what I have to say. Welcome, I'm Susie Pappas. I'm a member here at Montview. I've been involved in the church's gun violence prevention efforts for about 6 or 7 years now. Many of you know, but if you're new, you might not know that since 2017, Montview has been an endorsing member of an organization called Colorado Faith Communities United to End Gun Violence. It's a multi-faith, multi-congregational organization here in Denver metro area, Summit County, Boulder County. We've recently gotten some churches in Larimer County to join with us. All you have to do is turn on your car radio and hear about another mass shooting. I mean, there was one that's yesterday in California. Colorado's had more than our share of that, and that's doesn't even scratch the surface of the suicides, youth gun violence. Hard to open the Denver Post without seeing a teenager, often black or brown, who's been killed or injured with a gun. So it's a topic that we're all interested in. CFCU, Colorado Faith Communities United, one of the ways we try and move the needle on this issue is by being in touch with our legislators. So we have what we call a rapid response network. Many of you have signed up for that in the past. We're looking for more people. And when gun legislation comes before, either good or bad, stuff we like, stuff we don't like, comes before the General Assembly, we send out an alert and encourage people to write a letter. We give you a little help to contact their legislators. So so in a minute we'll be sending around a sign-up sheet. Please sign it even if you're already on our list, because we're going to be sharing this list with our partners in this work, Colorado Ceasefire. And I want to introduce you to Eileen McCarron and Leslie Irvin, I guess your names are up there, who are going to be making this presentation this morning. Colorado's fortunate. We have a lot of, compared to a lot of states, a lot of really good, helpful gun legislation. But legislation is only helpful if you know about it and people use it. And there's been a lot of discussion about the Extreme Risk Protection Order law in the news. The Club Q shooting, for example, the tattoo parlor guy about a year and a half ago, was it a little over a year ago, I guess. Any number of instances where people said, people should have known that this was a problem. So anyhow, Eileen and Leslie are going to share a little bit of information about that. I'm going to cheat and look at my phone here to give you a little more information. Eileen serves as president of Colorado Ceasefire Legislative Action. And one of the things, the way Ceasefire differs from CFCU is they actually pay a lobbyist, they endorse candidates. CFCU is a more policy oriented group, so we are nonpartisan in that way. But she was instrumental in initiating the extreme risk legislation in Colorado and in getting it enacted. Her early professional life was as a math educator, woman after my own heart. But she has worked as a volunteer in gun violence prevention since 1995. So thank you, Eileen. Leslie Irvin spent much of her adult life overseas running her scuba diving business in the Red Sea. So, I mean, that would be an interesting, I've never really explored that with you, Leslie, but, and then she opened a Pilates studio in Austin, Texas, while raising her 4 kids. After losing her husband in 2013, she joined Texas Gun Sense and advocated for the Extreme Risk Protection Order there for 6 years. She decided to move to Texas and to move to Colorado and work on it here, and she's been on the outreach board at Colorado Ceasefire and advocating and educating and since then. So we thank you both for being here. We're going to have time for questions at the end. So thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I just want to mention, if you sign up, we'd like to put you on our email list, and I will tell you, we generally only send out about 1 or 2 emails a month, and if you feel like it's too much, there's always an unsubscribe button at the bottom. So we're going to talk today about the Extreme Risk Protection Orders law that was enacted here in Colorado in 2019, and it's how you can use it, or if you know a family that's struggling with a family member that is having behavioral issues or mental health issues that is frightening to the family, that they can, what they can do to address it and use the law. But first we'll start with a little video.
Do you know someone at risk of suicide or violence against others who has access to a firearm? Gun violence takes the lives of over 800 Coloradans every year, and the vast majority of these gun deaths are suicides. In Colorado, you have a tool to help a loved one from harming themselves or others. An Extreme Risk Protection Order law, also known as ERPO, was created to temporarily prevent someone at risk of harm from buying or having access to guns. Family or household members, in addition to law enforcement, can request an ERPO. If the threat of violence requires immediate attention, you can request a temporary ERPO that is considered the day that it is filed. If granted, the temporary ERPO will last up to 2 weeks ahead of a full hearing for a final order that is in effect for up to 364 days. Depending on the immediate level of risk, you can file directly for a final ERPO. This process would require a hearing, at which both parties may participate. How do I use it? You can go to the district or county court where your loved one resides and file a petition. They will then be informed and given a copy of the petition. A hearing with a judge will determine if your loved one is at high risk and should have the ERPO take effect. If an ERPO is issued, firearms must be surrendered to law enforcement or sold to a federally licensed firearm dealer, putting time and space between an at-risk individual and a firearm. An ERPO can be renewed after 1 year if the risk of violence remains. Once the order expires, the firearms are returned. Why should I use this tool? If you know someone who is at risk of harming themselves or others and has access to a firearm, an ERPO can be a life-saving resource. ERPOs have been used in efforts to prevent mass shootings, suicides, and domestic violence. ERPOs are a proactive way to prevent unnecessary harm. Interested in learning more? Visit americanhealth.jhu.edu/implement-ERPO for a step-by-step guide on how to use this tool. Together, we can prevent gun violence. We are not providing legal advice. Every factual situation is unique, and if an individual wants legal advice specific to their particular circumstances, they should consult knowledgeable counsel.
So the story of the ERPO law, which is also called red flag pretty colloquially, started in Colorado on July 20th, 2012 with the Aurora Theater massacre, where 12 people were killed and another 70 were wounded either by gunfire or other events that happened there in the fleeing. The interesting thing in that case is that the shooter was actually being treated by a counselor, and he spoke to her of wanting to harm people, but he was not specific. The threat was general. And because of that, she could not invoke a 72-hour hold, which is called an M1 hold. But she did inform the police the campus police, it was at CU Anschutz campus, to be wary of this young man and be concerned about him. So there wasn't anything she could legally do. So actually, following that shooting and also the Sandy Hook shooting, which followed in December of that year, the Colorado legislature considered 8 gun violence prevention bills and 5 of them were enacted. So 8 minus 5, we had 3 that didn't get enacted, and one of those was to deal with the mental health issue that had surfaced at the Aurora theater shooting. And the solution we were proposing was that after an M1 hold, that someone would not be able to purchase a firearm for another year. It met the cutting room floor in a committee hearing. So I actually went back to the people who, at what was then the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, it's now the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. And I talked with Josh Horwitz there about, well, that one failed. And he goes, I can understand why. And, there's a better way to do it. So we've come up with other ideas and analysis and talking with psychiatrists and psychologists and people working in the mental health field. And that was the ERPO. So after, as you probably, those of you who lived here in 2013 will remember that following the enactment of those 5 bills, 2 legislators were recalled and another resigned rather than face recall election. And in the next election, the legislature turned to a party that does not support gun violence reform as holding the Senate. So it was like, okay, we can't run it now. So in 2016, we thought, well, okay, and heading into the new legislature, let's think about this. And so in May of 2016, we held a forum out at CU Anschutz and had 100 professionals in the therapy, psychiatrists, social workers, psychologists, and also some legislators and law enforcement there to talk about the issue of behavioral health and solutions. And we brought up the ERPO at that, hoping that in the elections of 2016, we would get a better legislature that would be able to consider this. But it didn't happen that way, and the party that, the Republicans, it is a very partisan issue, I'll just say it there. It's totally along party lines. The Republicans kept the Senate, and so we knew we couldn't run things. But New Year's Eve, out in Highlands Ranch, Deputy Zachary Parrish was shot and killed in an ambush. They were responding to someone who they knew that the sheriff's department knew had mental health problems, and they had been warned from people in Wyoming, where he had moved from, that you're going to have a lot of problems with this young man. And so they were very aware of the difficulties with it. And so they went out twice. The second time, they took a number of law enforcement people to take him into an M1 hold. And instead, he had an ambush set up for them. He injured a number of sheriff's deputies and killed Deputy Zachary Parrish. The mother of the shooter had actually tried to take his guns away. The shooter was a lawyer and told her, if you do that, I'll sue you. So she gave them back, and then we know the result. Actually, even though the legislature at that time was not in the hands of the Senate, was not in the hands of a party that was amenable to gun violence prevention, we actually tried in 2017 to run a bill. Our lobbyists got working the very first day, even before the very first day. They have these parties before the legislature starts for the lobbyists because they cannot contribute during this session. And so even at that, she was nailing people talking about this, and got immediately working with a bill with this, who later became Speaker of the House. He was Assistant Minority Leader at that time, Alec Garnett. And then they were shopping around trying to find a Republican sponsor, and that's where the holdup came. So the bill, they eventually did. Cole Wist became a sponsor, but the bill was introduced late, and it failed in the Senate, as we had feared it would do. But what happened, and I actually say as a joke, it was a brilliant strategy to do this, even though that was not our strategy. Our strategy was to pass the bill. But what happened is it became the conversation of the media. There was a lot of attention to the bill. So going into the elections, there was a lot of discussion. Into the 28 elections, there was a lot of discussion on this bill. And I can remember watching television the night of the election, and one of the anchors asking the other, "What are you going to do with your newfound power? What are the Democrats going to do with their newfound power?" And the only answer that was ever given is they're going to pass that red flag bill. So it was in the conscience of the citizenry and the legislators. So in 2019, legislators came in, and of course, that was one of their major priorities that year. And on April 12th of 2019, the Zachary Parrish III Violence Prevention Act was signed into law by the governor. It became effective in January of 2020. So Leslie.
One of the things that one of the things that has been found as they've been researching the ERPO, or the red flag law, is that families and law enforcement are often the first people to see the warning signs. And a lot of the times there's nothing they can do about it until it's too late. And that was my experience. I lived in Texas in 2013. I had, as Susie said, lived overseas. I had my 4 kids over in Saudi Arabia. My late husband, Scott, he was working there doing oil leasing as an attorney, and we always said I had the best job. So we had our 4 kids there, came back to America in 2000, and all during the time since my son Lex was born, my eldest son, I always felt like there was something going on. Up until he was in elementary school, though, he was not diagnosed with anything. The first diagnosis was for autism. So Scott and I tried everything we could for the next 10 years, trying to get him medication and treatment and services. We had the means, we had the desire, and there was nothing we could do to help him. But, as Scott said, our job is to love this young man who is unlovable. We must unconditionally love and support him, and that's what we did until he turned 18. At that time, he went to the local gun store and started buying guns on his 18th birthday. The owner of the gun store called me up because he was responsible. He said, "Your son is here, something's going on with him, and I'm not selling him a gun." I went down and picked him up on his 18th birthday, brought him home, and the first thing I did was call Austin Police, and I said, "Come on over. There's something going on with my son, and he's trying to buy guns." Austin Police came over. They interviewed my son. They said, "We agree with you, ma'am. He's in crisis. He should not have access to firearms." And I was so relieved. I said, "Good, what are we going to do?" And they said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, there's nothing we can do to help. As if he can find someone to sell him a gun, we can't stop him." I was horrified. My late husband was an attorney who said, "There's nothing we can do, Laz. We can do nothing." At that point, my son continued buying firearms. I didn't believe there was nothing we could do, though, so what I did was call Austin Police Department regularly. And I said, "My son is in crisis and he's buying firearms." They came over to my house. "Ma'am, why are you calling us? You know there's nothing we can do." "Yeah, well," I said, "I know what's going to happen. I'm telling you, my son is going to kill someone." And you're telling me there's nothing you can do. What you can do is write it down. Write down there's nothing you can do, because he's going to hurt someone. You can't help me. Over the next 2 years, I called them. They came over, same thing. We can't help you, ma'am. I said, I know that, but you're going to come after me. So you write down that you can't help me. On September 18th, 2013, my son came under the delusion that his dad, Scott, was a CIA agent who was working for the government. This was an imposter. They had killed his real dad, and he got a message that he needed to take this guy out from the CIA. On that day, I went out. I rarely went out, by the way, because I stayed home and made sure that everything was okay. I went out that night. 10 minutes after I left, I was crossing this bridge. I was talking to my daughter, and I said, I need to go home. Something's not okay. She said, Mom, everything's fine. Just keep going. But you know, you got that feeling. As soon as I got to the restaurant where I was meeting friends, I got a call from from my son Max, who said, Lex has killed Dad. He stabbed him. He didn't know he was dead yet. Lex has stabbed Dad. Turns out, what happened that night, right after I left, my son, Lex, had gone into his dad's office and fatally stabbed him. The only one who was there was my son Max at the time, who was 16. So my son Max, as a 16-year-old, subdued Lex, who had just killed his father. So I got home to my house, drove straight home, and what did I see? I saw my son Max sitting at the end of my driveway. He was covered in blood, and I couldn't speak to him for the whole rest of the night. Anyway, what happened after that was this. My son Lex called me the next day. I told him I would do whatever I could to help him, because I learned that night the true meaning of unconditional love, which is that no matter what, I'm going to support my son. I knew at that time my son had not killed his father. His mental illness had killed his father. So after I had settled everything, which took about 2 years, my son was found not guilty by reason of insanity. I'm very grateful. He's at a place now where he's being taken care of. He's a patient, not a prisoner. But after 2 years, when I got my life together, I got mad. I said, this is just not okay. And I started working for Texas Gun Sense, and all I did was walk around and tell my story to anyone who would listen. I heard one excuse after another from Texas lawmakers about why this was a bad bill. And after 6 years, 3 legislative sessions, I frankly gave up. I gave up on Texas, and I came here because, first of all, there is a happy ending. I met a lovely man. We're getting married. He happened to be from Denver, thankfully. I moved up here, started working for Colorado Ceasefire, and what we're doing is spreading the word that this law is available. There are sanctuary counties here that do not accept this law. That's fine. We're going to tell everybody all about them, why this law is necessary, and why we need to make more people aware of it so that they can use it. That's why we're here today.
I just wanted to note that Lex used a knife rather than a gun, but as Leslie has often said, when people murder, they don't just sit down and wait afterwards, and they tend to go on and do other things, like was done in Sandy Hook after the young man shot and killed his mother. He then went to the school, and he could have, at that point, taken his guns he had and go out and do more mayhem. So what is an extreme risk protection order? It's first, the thing that's very important is that it's a civil. It is a civil activity at the courts, and it is not criminal. It allows a household member, and we'll talk about what is a household member, or law enforcement to petition the court to temporarily remove a person's firearms and prohibit them further access to firearms if they pose a significant risk to themselves or to others. How does it help people in crisis stay safe? First, removing the gun access creates safer circumstances for the individual to seek treatment, stabilize their behaviors, access resources to address the causes of their dangerous behaviors.
So what behaviors indicate that an ERPO is needed? If somebody's in personal crisis, they may have suicidal thoughts, they may be experiencing aggression, or there could be a history of domestic violence. These people have usually demonstrated signs of being dangerous and perhaps have used threats of violence and may have a history of violence. And there also could be unsafe behavior with firearms. Oh, you can. I don't even know how to click it.
And I wanted to point out that it is not necessarily mental health. When we were debating this bill at the legislature, the opponents of it would often say, it's just mental health, we just need to address mental health. It can be behavioral issues. Someone could have lost their job and been upset that they lost their job, or maybe there's a death in the family that's to someone very close that is tearing them apart, or a breakup of a marriage. Crises that happen in people's lives that an individual is not able to handle well. So you want to talk about the household members?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who can file for an ERPO. So these are called household members in addition to law enforcement, of course. So the household members as petitioners, long list, they're related by blood, marriage, or adoption. They must have a child in common. No, they can have a child in common. They've resided with the respondent in the last 6 months. They can be domestic partners, step-parents, stepchildren, grandparents, grandchildren. People can file an ERPO if they're legal guardians, or if they've been married in the past, or are present married or unmarried couples.
Click on this button.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so there are two types of ERPO, one being a temporary, and then when the temporary ERPO, the hearing will be ex parte, a legal term that means that it will be without the person which in the ERPO we call the respondent present, without the respondent being present. The respondent is the person that you're concerned about with their behaviors. It will occur within 1 court day, and the reason it's so quick is because it's an urgent situation. If it's issued, if the judge finds cause, if the petitioner presents a convincing case to the judge, and if the judge finds that yes, that an ERPO will be issued, or that judge finds that he or she will issue an ERPO, then the law enforcement will be assigned to remove the firearms from the respondent and ensure that he or she can no longer buy firearms for the period of the ERPO. He also must surrender the concealed carry permit, and I sometimes say he, it can be she also. And then the respondent is informed that there will be a hearing for a full ERPO that will occur within 14 days. The temporary ERPO is only valid for 14 days. I'm going to talk about full ERPO.
So the next step after a temporary ERPO is issued is the respondent will be notified of a hearing and also can have legal counsel at state expense. So if the petitioner establishes a risk to themselves or to others, the court may issue a full or continuing ERPO. So this is good for 364 days. It is renewable, and the respondent may appeal one time during the 364-day period if they feel like they've made progress to try and get their firearms back.
That didn't go. So what are the steps to obtain an ERPO?
Okay, so the first step is you request a petition from your district or county court, and you can also download the form online. That's the first thing you do. The second thing you do is submit the petition to the district or county court. This is really important. It has to be in the county where the respondent, this is the person who's being served with the ERPO, lives. This is really confusing. This is the number one mistake, is people file in the wrong county. So again, you file in the county where the respondent, who's the person who's being served with the ERPO, lives. There's no fee for this, and it can be a confusing process. So there are these people called Sherlocks, and they work down at the court. They're free, no fee for these people, and they will help you walk through the process if you ask for help.
But no legal advice.
No legal advice from the Sherlocks.
But they can help you. So the third step is if you file for a temporary ERPO, what we said, it will happen, the hearing will happen within one court day, and you must attend in person. There are special circumstances where the court will hear it by phone, and probably with COVID they're doing that more, but they, I have heard of cases where they've heard it by phone, but those were only by special circumstances. If the court, and then the last step, if the court issues the ERPO, the respondent must surrender firearms and the concealed carry permit and be banned from buying more guns. They'll be put on the no-buy list for the NICS background checks, and again, provided lists of behavioral resources.
So if an ERPO is terminated or if it expires, firearms will be returned within 3 days after the respondent requests their return. And this is only if the respondent is eligible to possess these firearms. The NICS, which is the National Criminal Background Check System, will be updated, and then the respondent can reapply for a concealed carry permit.
And I think I skipped over that the respondent does have one opportunity within the year of the ERPO that they can appeal, but only one. So they can't come back to the court every week to do it, just one chance to appeal. If they can feel that they have addressed their behavioral health issue in sufficient way to convince the court that they're okay now and they're not a risk to themselves or others.
So, excuse me, the first extreme risk law, red flag law, was passed in Connecticut in 1999. And there's been a lot of states, 17 other states, that have enacted state laws after 2015. Indiana enacted its law in 2004. So there's been a lot of progress on this. We hope for more.
Right. And the law that was signed in June, Building Safer Communities or something, Safer Communities Act, has encouragements for states to pass ERPO laws, and then also additional funding for us to help to implement them in our states.
So abuse is avoided by the petitioner establishing a preponderance of evidence that the person poses a significant risk of injury to themselves or others. So a preponderance is more than 50%. But to get a full year ERPO, you need clear and convincing evidence, which is
I don't know, for the lawyers there's somebody out there, lawyers.
preponderance versus clear and convincing.
Like 75% or something of that nature. Pardon? Beyond a reasonable doubt, which isn't a criminal, yeah, as opposed to civil.
And then the petitioner also must submit an affidavit signed under oath and under penalty of perjury. So there have been cases where there has been false filings. One in Larimer County, where a woman filed an ERPO against a police officer that she said fathered her child. And that wasn't true. She was charged with perjury.
So let's discuss some myths and facts. Actually, I was talking with John, who's in the other room taking care of the audio and visual effects, and he had been at the Capitol and heard a lot of these debates on this bill, and we were discussing that before everybody got here. But so some of the myths. The first one is it's unconstitutional. It's an infringement of my right to bear arms.
Well, it turns out that the law has been challenged in 2 states and has been held to be constitutional. And
for due process because of this ex parte hearing.
untrue. The law, in fact, does include due process protections, and it's actually safer for law enforcement and suicidal people not to tip off the person in advance. It's the same ex parte procedure that's used in domestic violence.
This is going to be greatly abused by the police, ex-girlfriends, hateful neighbors, etc.
Well, what we have learned and has been proven that if you do file illegally against someone, then you will, in fact, be brought to trial. This is an evidence-based petition process with limited petitioners.
Well, certainly there are other less drastic ways like the M1 hold to address this issue.
Unfortunately, there's a limited number of beds for M1 holds, and also a lot of M1 holds are under 72 hours. And besides, I can tell you from my experience, people are not cured in 72 hours, and they come home to their firearms.
When we had our event in 2016, the police chief from Vail came and spoke, and his very hurt at a situation where he had put a young man in an M1 hold, and he was released, I think, in fewer than 72 hours, and he went back home and took his life with a gun. And so he was coming to speak to say, we need this law. Law enforcement's just going to be breaking down the doors to confiscate the firearms.
No, they actually use a search warrant, and savvy officers are trained and they know how to carry out the search warrant safely. Also, if they happen to bust into somebody's house and they see drugs, they're not going to worry about the drugs. If they see cocaine, if they see explosives, that's another story. But they're not busting in to look for anything else. They're simply going in to get the guns, and then they will leave.
Retrieving the firearms puts law enforcement officers at risk.
Yeah, obviously it does, but there's a much greater risk potentially if nothing is done.
People are going to try to take their lives in other ways if firearms are removed.
Turns out that 85% of gun deaths and of suicide attempts by gun end in death. 5% of suicides are successful in non-firearm attempts. So this is a really, really big cause. And
I think in Colorado, 50%, and it's actually true in the country too. It's always around 50% of suicides are by firearm, even though the number of suicide attempts is much, much higher by other means.
And there was also a study that is done that showed that 1 in 10 suicides can be prevented by ERPO or a red flag law. Right. 1 in 10.
Okay. This won't stop all mass shootings and suicides.
It's true, but it is an added tool that we need for protection.
So what's some of the history of filings here in Colorado? In 2020, there were 111 ERPOs filed in 24 counties. Denver was the highest. The majority were filed by law enforcement, who are far more successful in getting an ERPO issued than citizens, and that's because citizens make more mistakes. They've been filed for prevention of suicide, mass shootings, and domestic violence. In 2021, there were 144 ERPOs filed in 40 counties. Again, Denver's the highest. And in 2022, I just heard updated data. There were probably 125 filed in the state in 2022. I will also note that there were 38 counties that declared themselves sanctuary counties, and that they would not allow, they call them Second Amendment sanctuary counties, and they were not going to enforce this law. Well, actually, more than half of those counties have had petitions filed in them. Colorado incidents that ERPO could have been invoked, and Susie mentioned some of these. There was an Aurora apartment shooter. Luckily, no one was hurt. That in 2021, that it would have made sense. The neighbors in the community had complained to the police a lot about the scary behaviors of this individual. The Boulder King Soopers shooter in March of 2021, that's actually where we began working heavily to promote the awareness program. It was after that one, because the family had tried to take his guns away. They knew he was a problem, but they didn't know about the ERPO law. The Denver Spree shooter in last year, again, there was a lot of evidence that this shooter should have been disarmed, and we don't quite understand why the Denver police didn't do it, even though Denver's been pretty good about working on ERPOs. And of course, the Colorado shooter in Club Q, the sheriff there, who has not gone after one ERPO. The shooter in that case was clearly, he had been charged with trying to bomb his mother's house and other issues about suggesting mass shootings, but the sheriff didn't do anything. And because he was opposed to this law, he has come under a great deal of derision in the media for that choice. He is no longer the sheriff. There's a new sheriff in town, and whether he is going to enforce ERPO is yet to be seen. He actually was the vice president of the Pikes Peak Firearms Coalition, a gun rights organization, so I don't know. Why does law enforcement have better success at doing an ERPO? One is police officers and sheriff's deputy, they have a lot of familiarity with the court. They've gone there many times to testify, and they know the judges. The judges, they've dealt with them enough that there's a trust relation built up. And they're also familiar with court forms. I've looked at all the El Paso filings as whatever data I could look at, and I could see that a lot of people filing don't understand the law, and the judges immediately push it out. And one person filed against somebody in Texas. They have to be in the county, and then somebody couldn't find their reason on the list of reasons as being a household member, so they wrote in neighbor. Neighbors are not qualified people to file for an ERPO. So they didn't have the relationship with the responder. The respondent, in some cases, the threat was not recent. It wasn't even an ERPO issue. There were even cases of things of child abuse, and the judge actually said you need to seek a protection order in civil court on domestic violence or child abuse. And then the last is that the threat didn't rise to the level of urgency for the need for firearms removal. I have this idea about domestic violence protection orders. It turns out that we now have a law in Colorado as of 2013 that when a domestic violence protection order is issued or a misdemeanor offense on domestic violence, that there's an automatic, they're supposed to relinquish firearms from the person who's the offender, the abuser. That is not true if it's a temporary protection order. And so and it's also not true if it occurs in municipal courts. And so I'm actually suggesting, and we're going to try to reach out to the DV counselors, that they ought to, if there's any clue of possibility of gun violence, that they ought to simultaneously pursue an ERPO while they do the temporary domestic violence. Why is that? If a domestic violence victim, if her or his abuser has access to a firearm, they are 5 times more likely to die from than a person whose abuser doesn't. So some success stories. In Connecticut, a man whose wife had recently passed thanked the EMTs. He had been the EMTs when they came out to the house to help when his wife was dying. He was making comments about his life was meaningless, he had no reason to continue to live, whatever. And the EMTs in Connecticut turned it over to people who could file an ERPO, and he told them later, "You saved my life."
Yeah, this happens a lot. Several respondents have thanked the court for intervention in Washington. One said, "I was in a dark place."
The Larimer County Sheriff's Office, they overheard an ERPO on planning a mass shooting for when he got out.
In Arapahoe County, a woman's husband had made threats on his own life, and he agreed to an ERPO.
And in Maryland, a teenager posted pictures of himself with an AR-15 and the word school shooter, and he was disarmed and perhaps prevented a school shooting. So what's the research? Leslie referred to the Duke study of 2017, where they examined Connecticut's firearms laws. On the average, 7 guns were removed from each order. Actually, we don't have that data here in Colorado. It's not asked or recorded how many guns were removed when they processed the ERPO. 1 in 3 of the ERPO people were given mental health and drug and alcohol counseling, and for
Every 10 to 20 orders, at least one suicide was prevented.
And they also commented about awareness. In Connecticut's law, which was enacted in 1999, there wasn't a lot of use of it. And for some reason, after the 2007 Virginia Tech shooting, not even in Connecticut, but people became more aware of the law. I guess publicity increased, and the number of gun removals went up 5-fold. So what can you do to help educate yourself? We have brochures on the back table and also buttons, and also a brochure on safe storage, which is very, very important for protecting our youth from finding guns. And it's also important not only for children doing accidents, but youth who are getting access to them and going into the schools. We just had a report that there was it 200? A lot of guns taken in Denver schools that just came out. And talk to friends and colleagues about ERPO. If someone's talking with you about they're concerned about their son or their husband or something, tell them about it. Tell them about the ERPO. Share the handouts and other resources and share the information on social media. And you can also host an informational meeting if you're in a club like Kiwanis Club. I'm actually trying to get into the Kiwanis Club in Monument. My brother lives in Monument, and I have to tell you, he is a super right-wing guy, and I'm trying desperately to get into his club. I talked to other club members to have it happen, because I think it's, regardless of your political standing, it's a life-saving tool. It's a tool there that any citizen can use, and the more people know about it, the more lives we can save. And if you can help us identify communities that could benefit from using this information. And if you have any questions, I'd say go to our website, but right now there's been a problem. In the last 2 days, we're trying to transfer it to another server, and it's having difficulties, but it'll be up soon. Go to our website, we have more information there. And any questions? Oh. And I would be remiss if I didn't note Dr. Todd, so you had a question. Who has worked a lot on gun violence and children issues?
Let's use a microphone so it can be on the live stream, okay?
Thank you, Eileen and Leslie. It was a terrific presentation, but I'm disturbed. what disturbs me is this concept of a sanctuary county. Okay, now, and it's not just for ERPO, it's also for safe storage. So, especially for children, many injuries and deaths are due to, from a firearm, are due to access to guns lying around. They don't own them, but they're lying around loaded. And so, is there, I mean, you get a sheriff and he says, oh, no, I'm a sanctuary county. Is there something that we need to do legally to eliminate that as a concept and to say, no, you need to enforce the law? It seems that that's a gap, and it especially worries me for safe storage.
Yeah, the issue about the safe storage is that the sheriff or police chief or the police officers are not going to file charges against the parents who leave guns sitting out. They'll just ignore it. So the sad part is that there is a high correlation between the counties that declared themselves sanctuary counties and suicides, the high counties with high suicides. There's two things I'm hopeful for. One is that sheriffs around the state took note of how much grief the sheriff in Colorado Springs got over his failure to use a law. He had never used it. I was wondering back last like March or something, I was looking at the data and I went, what is wrong in El Paso County? They are getting denied at 73% rate. And I didn't have access to the data that I've now learned how I can look at it to see what's happening. And I had several reporters that I said, could you look into this? Can you investigate it? Because I personally did not have the time to get all the effort to go research it. But, I think this is a fascinating story. What's going on in El Paso County? Because the denial rate in the rest of the state is like 30%. In El Paso at that time it was 73%. With the Colorado Springs shooting, one of the reporters called me back and he said, you asked me to look at this, and I should have. So then some of them did, and they saw that the reason is that all but 2 of the filings in that city or that county were done by civilians. And the 2 that were done by the Colorado Springs police, they were approved. And I looked at all what the documents I did have access to, and a lot of people made big mistakes, which I went through in there. The guy who put in neighbor, The other thing that gives me hope is they are going to revisit the ERPO law this legislative session. And New York did do something about trying to force a sheriff to do it, and I need to look at the language of that law. I haven't seen it, but I know that after the Buffalo shooting, because that was another one that an ERPO could have been invoked, and nobody did. But there's something about trying to hold law enforcement accountable. I'm not sure exactly how you will word that. It's a little bit difficult how you force law enforcement to do their job. I mean, we have trouble getting law enforcement to enforce the high-capacity magazine ban. They're looking the other way. And there will be additional, I believe in the ERPO law that they're going to come out with, or the bill, and the governor has indicated he's anxious to sign something like this. They're going to increase the people who can file. I've not seen a bill, so I'm not telling you anything inside baseball. It's just my observation, probably teachers and healthcare workers. I don't know if co-workers will be it, because there's concern about that, and it won't include neighbors. I saw another
Questions?
question back
Just a
there.
minute, Matt.
The woman with the white sweater and red scarf. Oh, well, we'll go there first.
Dr. Peter Ulach, at our 8:30 service this morning, talked about finding the center. the number of filings per year seems so small to me, 144 in a year. It just seems very, very small. But my question is, in finding the center, what do you say to different counties, different states who say, you're taking my rights away? How do you have a conversation that says, that is not what we're trying to do, and hear us out? How does that happen?
So I think there are two really divisive issues in this country, and one is abortion and the other is firearms. And it's the people are very polarized on it. What I often try to say on the sanctuary counties is your sheriffs and county commissioners are doing you a terrible disservice because they're removing a tool to save people's lives in your county. And you, particularly in high suicide counties, they're removing an important life-saving tool. And I think, again, I'm hopeful that people will just become more comfortable with the law and be willing to utilize it more, and sheriffs being able to utilize it more. I don't know how we actually get all this get to common ground on the gun issue. It's a difficult one. You know, there's because there's pending legislation that's going to come out this year because of the Democratic sweep, and then the awful gun violence that we're having, particularly in Aurora and Denver, also Colorado Springs, high gun violence cities, that the Rocky Mountain gun owners already is sharpening their knives and cleaning their guns because they've already gotten quite ambitious about what's happening, and they've already gotten their members so stoked up on rhetoric that some people have already been threatening a state senator's life, death threats.
I have one thing to say on this after having worked in Texas, right? Because all we did in Texas is we never talked to the friendlies. We would go out and talk to people that disagreed with us, that felt like we were coming to take their guns. We had a lot of licensed gun owners that were hunters on our board, as we do here. And what I did, one of the things I did, because these are small rural counties, a lot of them in Texas, same as in Colorado, maybe they're larger counties. But what I would do is I would go to these places in Texas that no one else would go to and talk to people that no one else would talk to. And this is what we're trying to do now, was we want to go to these places where everyone believes that we're doing something they don't want. Here's what happens. If I get in front of people, when we talk about stories, one-on-one, here's what happened to me. All of a sudden, you're not talking to somebody from a different party. You're talking to a mom or a dad or a brother. They all have the same issues. They know people who've died by suicide. They know people that are experiencing crisis, that have firearms. And if we can just get in front of those people, this is why we really need to go to those sanctuary counties. Get in front of them, talk to them one-on-one. I did this in Texas, and it changes hearts, it changes minds, because we're not talking about us and them, we're talking about us together. That's what we need to do, in my opinion, here.
Okay, we're at the end of our time, but I'll do one more question. Yeah, no, I'm going to let her talk.
Thank you. It's actually just a comment now, because you said that the legislation is up for review and additional parties would be included in it, and I was happy to hear that healthcare providers are one of those parties, because I'm a physician at Denver Health, and it's great that family members can petition, but I take care of a lot of people who are placed on M1 holds or should be question about their gun ownership and our suicide risk, and we really don't have any resources to put their guns elsewhere. So I think we can talk to families when there are families, but when people don't have that social network, it's more difficult. So I think that'll be great.
Great. And if the law is changed, we'd like to get out and talk with your community of healthcare providers. Actually, after these slides, I have a bunch of slides on filling out an ERPO form and the where the people make mistakes and trying to avoid those. It is a little bit daunting for people, for some people going to the courts. Yeah.
Thank you, Eileen and Leslie. It's so informative. Thank you all for coming. Maybe you don't need an ERPO, but you might know somebody who could benefit from that information. Take 2 brochures, share it with somebody. The head of CFCU said if everybody told their barber and hairdresser about this, think of all the people they could serve in the conversations that they hear, you know, people talking about their worries. So just planting a seed. I thank you all for coming. Thank Eileen and Leslie for all the good work that you're doing. You know, stay involved. It's really an important issue.
For the opportunity.